The security guard wouldn't look me in the eye. That was the first sign something was wrong. The second sign was the cardboard box sitting neatly on my desk. The third sign was my own son standing in the doorway of my office beside a corporate attorney. At 61 years old, after spending more than 3 decades building Carter Industrial Solutions from a rented garage into a company worth nearly $80 million, I was about to be removed from the building that carried my family's name. Not by a competitor. Not by a hostile investor. By my own son. And the strangest part? I wasn't surprised. Because 2 months earlier, I had discovered exactly what Ethan had been hiding. And while he thought he was ending my career, he was actually walking into a trap he had built for himself. My name is Michael Carter. And this is the story of how the person I trusted most nearly destroyed everything I built. For most of my life, I believed that hard work could solve almost any problem. I started my company at 27 years old with 1 delivery van, 2 employees, and a loan that terrified me every month. There were years when I slept 4 hours a night. Years when my wife Linda and I skipped birthdays, vacations, and holidays because payroll came first. We sacrificed because we believed we were building something that would outlive us. Something we could eventually pass down to our children. Our son Ethan grew up watching that sacrifice. He spent summers sweeping warehouse floors, loading trucks, organizing inventory. The employees treated him like family because he was family. Everyone expected him to take over one day. Including me. Especially me. For years, Ethan seemed perfect for the role. Smart. Driven. Confident. He earned an MBA. Joined the company full-time at 28. And quickly climbed through management. The board loved him. Clients loved him. Employees respected him. Or at least they appeared to. Looking back now, I realize I missed the warning signs. Not because they weren't there. Because I didn't want to see them. The first changes came after Linda passed away. My wife died unexpectedly from a heart condition. One day she was planning a family vacation. 3 weeks later, she was gone. The loss affected both Ethan and me. But it affected us differently. I became quieter. He became harder. More impatient. More ambitious. More concerned with appearances. He started talking about modernization. Restructuring. Aggressive expansion. None of those ideas were bad on their own. But there was something underneath them that felt different. Something colder. I ignored it. Because grief changes people. At least that's what I told myself. 6 months before I was fired, our chief financial officer requested a private meeting. Karen Mitchell had worked with me for 15 years. She wasn't dramatic. She wasn't emotional. Which is why I immediately knew something was wrong when she closed my office door and locked it. Then she placed a folder on my desk. "Before you open this," she said carefully, "I need you to understand that I didn't want to believe it either." My stomach tightened. I opened the folder. Inside were financial records. Vendor contracts. Payment authorizations. Consulting agreements. At first nothing looked unusual. Then I started noticing patterns. Payments going to unfamiliar companies. Consulting fees that seemed unusually large. Invoices approved without standard review procedures. And every trail led back to Ethan. I looked up at Karen. "There has to be an explanation." "I hope so," she replied quietly. But her face told me she didn't believe that anymore. Neither did I. Instead of confronting Ethan, I hired an independent forensic auditor. Quietly. Privately. Without informing anyone else. I needed facts. Not suspicions. For 6 weeks the investigation continued. The results were devastating. Several shell companies had received millions in company funds. Many of those companies were connected through layers of ownership designed to hide their true beneficiaries. Eventually the trail ended. With Ethan. Over $3 million had been redirected. But strangely, the money wasn't the most disturbing discovery. The most disturbing discovery was a series of emails. Private communications. Messages between Ethan and a venture capital group. The discussions weren't about expanding the company. They were about taking control of it. Removing me. Limiting my voting authority. And eventually forcing me into retirement. I sat in silence after reading those documents. Not because I was shocked. Because I was heartbroken. I had spent 34 years building a business. But more importantly, I had spent 34 years trying to build a family. And somehow, I had failed at one of those goals. 3 months later, I walked into headquarters and saw the cardboard box. The board meeting had been scheduled weeks earlier. Officially it was described as a leadership transition discussion. Unofficially it was a coup. Ethan sat confidently at the head of the conference table. Several board members avoided eye contact. The attorney cleared his throat. Then the presentation began. Slides. Charts. Corporate language. Carefully rehearsed explanations. Eventually Ethan stood. "Dad, the company needs new leadership." I nodded. He continued. "The board believes it's time for a transition." Transition. Interesting word. People always invent polite words for ugly actions. I listened patiently. When they finished, the room became silent. Everyone waited for my reaction. For anger. For shouting. For resistance. Instead I asked a simple question. "Are you finished?" The attorney looked confused. Ethan frowned. "Yes." I nodded. "Good." Then I opened my briefcase. And everything changed. I placed 3 binders on the conference table. One in front of Ethan. One in front of the attorney. One in front of the board. Nobody spoke. The room felt smaller. Heavier. "Before we discuss leadership," I said calmly, "we should probably discuss fraud." The color disappeared from Ethan's face. Not all at once. Gradually. Like water draining from a sink. I watched realization spread across the room. Board members opened binders. Pages turned. Expressions changed. Confusion became concern. Concern became shock. The forensic report was thorough. Every transaction documented. Every payment traced. Every connection established. There was nowhere to hide. The attorney stopped reading halfway through and removed his glasses. One board member actually whispered, "My God." Ethan looked at me. Then at the documents. Then back at me. And for the first time in months, he looked scared. The emergency board meeting lasted nearly 4 hours. By the end of it, the planned vote against me had been suspended indefinitely. Outside auditors were brought in. Financial controls were frozen. Certain accounts were restricted. And Ethan was placed on immediate administrative leave. The same people who had supported him that morning refused to stand beside him that afternoon. That's the thing about loyalty built on success. It disappears when facts arrive. When the meeting ended, Ethan followed me into the parking garage. "Dad." I stopped walking. He looked desperate. Nothing like the confident executive from earlier. You planned this? I looked at him. No, Ethan. I said quietly. You planned this. Then I got into my car and drove away. The next few weeks were brutal. Investigations expanded. More financial records surfaced. More hidden agreements emerged. The venture capital group quickly distanced itself. Several executives resigned. The media eventually caught wind of the situation. Industry publications began asking questions. Investors became nervous. Clients demanded explanations. The company faced its biggest crisis since its founding. Ironically, the people who helped save it were the same employees Ethan had spent years ignoring. Warehouse supervisors. Operations managers. Regional directors. People who genuinely cared about the business. They worked around the clock. Not for me. Not for shareholders. For each other. That loyalty carried us through. One evening, about 2 months later, I received a phone call. It was Ethan. I considered ignoring it. Instead I answered. For several seconds neither of us spoke. Finally he said, I never thought it would go this far. I stared out the window. The sunset painted the sky orange and gold. Colors Linda always loved. It always goes this far, I replied. What do you mean? When you start compromising your integrity, you don't notice how far you've traveled until you can't find your way back. Silence. Then I heard him exhale slowly. I messed up. Yes. I don't know why I did it. That part was easy. I do. He waited. You stopped caring about building something. You started caring about owning something. The silence that followed lasted nearly 20 seconds. Then the call ended. 3 months after the failed takeover, Ethan lost everything. His executive position. His board seat. His reputation. Most of the people he thought were friends disappeared. The investors vanished. The consultants stopped returning calls. The people who encouraged his ambition were nowhere to be found. Because they had never cared about him. Only what they could gain from him. That's a lesson some people learn too late. 6 months later, the company was stable again. Not perfect. But stable. Revenue recovered. Clients returned. Operations normalized. One Friday afternoon, I stood inside our original warehouse. The same building where everything had started. The concrete floors were older now. The walls carried decades of wear. But standing there reminded me of something important. Buildings don't create companies. People do. Trust does. Character does. Those things matter far more than money ever will. As I looked around, I thought about Linda. About the sacrifices we made. About the years we spent believing in something bigger than ourselves. And I realized something. Ethan's betrayal wasn't the end of my story. It wasn't even the most important chapter. It was simply a reminder. A reminder that success means very little if you lose yourself trying to achieve it. A reminder that power without integrity eventually destroys itself. And a reminder that sometimes the people who hurt you most are the people you love the most. But their choices don't have to define your future. Only your response does. Today, Carter Industrial Solutions is stronger than it was before. Not because of me. Not because of a board. But because good people chose to protect what mattered. And Ethan? I still love my son. I probably always will. But trust is different from love. Love can survive almost anything. Trust has to be earned. One decision at a time. One day at a time. And sometimes, one lifetime at a time. The morning I saw that cardboard box on my desk, everyone thought they were watching the end of a man's career. What they were actually watching was the beginning of the truth. And in the end, the truth did what it always does. It arrived quietly. Then it changed everything. The pressure didn't stop when the investigation became public. In many ways, that was when the real challenge began. Every morning brought new problems. Clients wanted reassurance. Suppliers wanted guarantees. Employees wanted answers. And unfortunately, uncertainty spreads through an organization faster than almost anything else. People started whispering in hallways. Rumors traveled between departments. Some employees believed the company was about to collapse. Others assumed there was even more information being hidden. I couldn't blame them. Trust had been damaged. And rebuilding trust is always harder than building it in the first place. So I made a decision. Instead of hiding behind lawyers and press statements, I gathered every employee we had. Warehouse workers. Drivers. Office staff. Managers. Everyone. More than 600 people joined a company-wide meeting. Some attended in person. Others joined online. I stood on a stage with no prepared speech. No public relations team. No carefully crafted presentation. Just honesty. I told them the truth. Not every detail. Some matters were still under investigation. But enough truth to let them know where we stood. I explained what had happened. I explained what we were doing to fix it. And most importantly, I explained that the company wasn't going anywhere. When I finished speaking, nobody applauded. Nobody cheered. But something better happened. People started asking questions. Real questions. Difficult questions. The kind that only come from people who still care. For nearly 2 hours, I answered every question they asked. Nothing was off limits. By the time the meeting ended, I noticed something I hadn't seen in weeks. Hope. Not certainty. Not confidence. Hope. And sometimes that's enough. A few days later, I received an unexpected visitor. His name was Marcus Rivera. He managed one of our largest distribution centers. Marcus had worked for the company for nearly 20 years. He knocked on my office door and stepped inside. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. Of course. He sat down carefully. For a moment, he seemed unsure what to say. Then he leaned forward. "You know why people stayed?" I shook my head. He smiled slightly. "Because when things were good, you never acted like you were better than us." I didn't respond immediately. Marcus continued. "When my daughter needed surgery 8 years ago, you covered my shifts so I could be at the hospital." I barely remembered the incident. To me it had been a small gesture. To him it clearly wasn't. "When my wife lost her job during the recession, you made sure my overtime hours stayed available." He laughed quietly. "You probably don't even remember that either." The truth was, I didn't. Not specifically. Over the years there had been hundreds of situations like that. Small decisions. Small moments. Things that felt insignificant at the time. Marcus stood. "People don't stay loyal because of salaries." He pointed toward the warehouse outside the window. "They stay loyal because they remember who showed up when it mattered." Then he left. And I sat there for a long time thinking about what he had said. A month later, another surprise arrived. This one came in the mail. A handwritten letter. The envelope had Ethan's name on it. I almost threw it away. Instead, I opened it. The letter was 6 pages long. For the first time since everything happened, there were no excuses. No justifications. No attempts to shift blame. Just honesty. He admitted that his ambition had slowly become greed. He admitted that he had surrounded himself with people who constantly told him he deserved more. People who encouraged him to see every relationship as a transaction. Every conversation as a negotiation. Every obstacle as something to be removed. Including me. The final page was the hardest to read. He wrote that after losing everything, he finally understood something my wife had tried to teach him years earlier. Success without character eventually becomes failure. No matter how impressive it looks from the outside. I folded the letter and placed it inside my desk drawer. Not because everything was forgiven. Because healing begins when truth replaces lies. Nearly a year after the boardroom incident, I visited my wife's grave. It was something I did several times each year. The cemetery sat on a small hill overlooking a quiet lake. Linda loved that view. I brought fresh flowers and sat beside the stone. The wind moved gently through the trees. For a while I said nothing. Then I found myself talking. About the company. About the investigation. About Ethan. About everything. I know that sounds strange. Talking to someone who isn't there. But sometimes grief never really leaves. It just changes shape. And somehow sitting there helped. Before leaving, I looked down at her name engraved in stone. Then I remembered something she used to say whenever life became difficult. People eventually reveal who they are. At the time I always thought she was talking about others. Now I realize she was talking about all of us. Pressure reveals character. Pain reveals character. Success reveals character. The question isn't whether life will test us. The question is what those tests will uncover. Today, when people ask me what hurt the most, they usually expect a different answer. They think it was the money. The betrayal. The public embarrassment. The investigation. But it wasn't any of those things. The hardest part was realizing that I had spent years assuming someone else shared my values simply because they shared my last name. That's a mistake many people make. Character isn't inherited. It's chosen. Every day. Through hundreds of decisions nobody else sees. And eventually those decisions become a life. A reputation. A legacy. That's why I don't think about the boardroom very often anymore. I don't think about the cardboard box. I don't think about the vote. I don't even think about the betrayal. What I remember are the people who stayed. The employees who refused to quit. The managers who worked through the crisis. The friends who called when nobody was watching. The people who proved that loyalty still exists. Because in the end, those people became the real success story. Not the company. Not the money. Not the headlines. The people. And if there's one lesson I learned from everything that happened, it's this. You can lose a position. You can lose money. You can lose opportunities. But if you keep your integrity, you still have the most valuable thing you'll ever own. And unlike everything else in life, nobody can take that away from you.